Amber and Vince for joining us. And yeah, for the new people who have joined us, I'll just give a little introduction of who we are. So I'm Utsav and a co-organizer of Software Craftspeople community. And we are a not-for-profit organization, and our aim is to connect people with software craftsman mindset. And it is sponsored by Incubite, which is a software services company. And Incubite is the founder and sponsor of our SCI community. And the aim of Incubite is also to focus on delivering well-crafted software. So we generally organize expert talks, roundtables, workshops, and other similar things to help the community get better at their craft. And our previous talks are available on our YouTube channel. And you can reach us at uh, this our Twitter handle, LinkedIn, and Meetup. And yeah, again, welcome Amber and Vince. So Amber is Associate Manager UX Research and Research Operations at Red Hat, and we also have Vince, who is a Principal Interaction Designer at Red Hat. And the topic is user experience research and design, which is crucial to software development. And with this, I'll just hand it over to Amber, and you can take my screen.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Utsav. So is it already showing or do I need to start sharing again?
You'll need to share your screen again.
Okay, looking good?
Yes.
Okay. Well, good morning for us, good afternoon or evening for those who are joining us. My name is Amber, as said. I hope you can tell the difference between me and Vince. Sometimes we get mixed up. So we're here today to talk about something that we're very passionate about. Both Vince and I have worked with engineers, developers, architects, and all sorts of creators for a long time. And today we hope to cover what are UXR, UXD, UI, some of these terms that you might hear used interchangeably, and IA, how research and how design supports what you do. You care very much about making great stuff, and design and research will help you pick the right stuff to make and make it so that the people that use it really enjoy it. And then practical steps that you could take right after this. So you won't be like a certified researcher or anything, but you'll be able to get started. So, of course, at first we start with the necessary definition slides. What are all these terms that we're going to be using today? So a visual that we thought was good that we took down from Mind Inventory. A lot of times you'll hear UX, UI, developer, or designer. UI is a subset of UX. UX covers all the things that we're going to talk about today. So UI is the user interface, which is the thing that you build. And it is the part that the person knows that they're interacting with, the part that they touch. There may be haptics or other interactions. Definitely does include the way it looks, the words on the screen, and the way the information is laid out for them. Now UX, again, does encompass UI, but it has a lot of other components because UX is the experience of the end user, the human being. So it's what's going on in their head as they engage with the UI. And there were so many things, Vince and I had to start somewhere. So we're going to focus today on information architecture, research, wireframes, stories or scenarios, and overall interaction design. That's what you're going to learn about today. So why do you care? A study published recently by Forrester Research said that a great user interface can increase the conversion rate of a website by 200%. You want your stuff to look good. However, a great user experience can increase the same by almost 400%. A fourfold increase if it doesn't just look sleek and work, but also makes the person happy while they're using it. So that's where user experience research can come in. That is the study of end users. And you might have heard of a lot of other research in software, like marketing research, which focuses on buying behaviors. UX research is not really about the product, but about the person who uses it. And you've probably heard a lot of other terms around research. Not going to try to teach all of that today, but I will have them just in this little table so you know they are legitimate ways to describe research. The terms that you will hear Vince and I using are generative and evaluative on some of our slides. And the explanation is right there in the name. Generative means we're generating understanding of the user and their circumstances. What do they need? What do they use today? What do they wish for? What is their mental model, which Vince is going to get into. Then the other form of research that we typically do is evaluative. How are they feeling about the product currently? What do they think of this new prototype or of the proposed change in the product? So just so you can follow us, those are two terms that we'll be using a little bit.
All right, thanks, Amber. There's a lot on this slide. It's pretty dense, but I thought it was important right up front to distinguish between user experience design, user interface design, and information architecture. Amber touched on it a little bit, but I want to do a little bit of a deeper dive on each of these terms. So user experience design is just a human-first approach to the design of products and services. Everything that we design exists to serve human beings and to help them meet some goal or accomplish a task. So UX design at its core is just putting the human at the center of the design process. Rather than starting by specifying a set of features and functions for a product and then combining them into a product or service, UX design starts with the needs of the users and identifies the features and functions that are necessary to meet those user needs. A good UX design shows empathy towards users by providing layouts and workflows that and terminology that meet the expectations and mental models of the users. And you may have heard the term mental model before. And what that is it's what a person believes about how something works in the real world. So think about a website that you might visit often. You probably have some expectations when you go there. Like, where's the navigation? It's going to probably be either along the top or along the left side of the screen. And if you wanted to search for something, where would you look? Probably you're going to find a search bar in the upper right. And what do you expect to see in the upper left corner? It's probably going to be a logo or some sort of branding element. And finally, what do you expect to happen if you click on blue or underlined text? It's most likely going to be a link to take you somewhere else. And we've developed these shared mental models because of past experiences. So when we encounter a new website, we have expectations about how it's going to work. There's no law that says it has to work that way, but designers lay out websites in a certain way in order to match users' mental models. So that's user experience design. User interface design, on the other hand, as Amber said, it's a subset of user experience design. And it's just the visual or auditory or haptic manifestation of the user experience design. It's what the user sees, touches, hears. It's concerned with aesthetics, colors, topography, layouts, as well as user performance. How fast can users complete a task? What are their error rates when they're trying to do so? And a good user interface design enables simple task completion, and it should evoke a positive user response. The user should feel good about having interacted with that design. Okay, and just like user interface design, information architecture is also a subset of UX design. The structure, organization, and labeling of the information within the application or website is what information architecture is all about. So you can see it's very closely related to UI design, but it has subtle differences. It's more tightly scoped. It's really just about three things: the layout of the content on each page, the page-to-page flow through the interface, and then the way that users find information. And a good IA is key to users being able to use a product or service or website efficiently. In terms of how these interact with research, UX design starts and ends with research. It's driven by research. Before you can start designing something, you need to know who you're designing for. The who typically comes from marketing research. Marketers will figure out who the target audience is for a product. But then once you know who you're designing for, you can use generative UX research techniques, some of which Amber's going to talk about in a minute, to help you understand those users' goals, their unmet needs, and their pain points. For UI design, research is more about that evaluative research that Amber mentioned. It's about validating what you've designed. A user can't tell you how to design a UI. That comes with training and experience. Research can tell you, though, through measurement and observation, if a UI design is effective in meeting a user's needs. And so where UX design is driven by research, for information architecture, that's driven more by context and best practices. Research can guide a designer by helping him or her understand the context in which a product is going to be used, but the IA will depend largely on best practices and conventions for a given context. For example, the layout of a travel website will likely look very different than the layout of an online shopping service. And so just like there's not one software architecture that works for all products, there's not one information architecture that works for all UIs. So where does UX fit into the software development lifecycle? Now that we're familiar with all those terms, let's talk about how they relate to what you guys do on a day-to-day basis. So you've probably seen some version of a slide like this somewhere else. It depicts the software development lifecycle as a circle, a continuous iterative process. And sometimes there are 5 stages in the process, sometimes there's 7, but this lifecycle model shows all the things that need to be done to deliver software. And these stages apply regardless of the development process used, whether that's agile or waterfall or spiral or something else. This model kind of always applies. Now, I don't want to go into the details of each stage because you're all probably very familiar with them. But just as a quick review, planning involves figuring out the goals of the product. Who is it being built for? How's it going to be built? Which processes and tools are we going to use, etc. The analysis stage, which could also be called requirements definition, answers the question, what are we going to build? In design, that's when the product architecture is defined. What are the pieces of the product and how are they going to fit together? During the implementation or development stage, this is when the code is written and tested. So you're writing code, you're testing code, you're writing code, you're testing code. If you're working in Agile, these are your development sprints. And finally, there's a test and integration, separate test and integration phase, which kind of comes at the end of your development sprints. It's that final acceptance testing that says, yeah, this product is ready to ship. And then the last stage in the process is maintenance. So this is about supporting a released product. It's about fixing bugs that are found in the field, learning what works and doesn't work for your users. And we never get things right the first time. And so we know once a product's released, there's going to be bugs. We're going to have to fix those bugs. And the output of this maintenance phase feeds the planning phase for the next version of the product. So it's iterative. So we know the process is iterative and that learnings from existing products and releases, along with new market requirements, are going to drive future product releases. Here, all I've done is taken the model we just showed and I've laid it out in a straight line so it's easier to see how the intersections with UX research and UX design fit into the software development lifecycle. As you can see, UX research and design are integral at each stage. On the research side, UX involvement starts with generative research during the planning stage and continues right through product release and maintenance with user acceptance testing and customer satisfaction surveys. Design should also begin during planning as designers seek to understand the users they're designing for and continue right through implementation and testing. Now Amber and I are going to talk in some detail about how various UX research and design activities support the product development at each stage in the life cycle.
Thanks, Vince. So for research, I listed a few techniques that can apply to each cycle, but there are actually many different tools you could use to understand and answer, depending on what questions you have at each phase. So let's look at a few ways that research can support what you're doing. First, the reason that we need to do research, most of you have seen some kind of picture like this. I've seen paths like this in real life. The reason that we need to really understand the user before we can make something for them is because a lot of times we can design something that people aren't going to use. In this case, humans don't want to walk out one way and then take a right turn and then backtrack. They want to take the hypotenuse. They find shortcuts and novel ways to use things. So it's often good to understand where they are so you can anticipate what they're going to do. And the reason that really becomes important in testing whether our solution is accurate is QE can automate testing of what we expect, that optimal path or that happy path. For example, a robot can be a surrogate for a human sitting on a chair in the way that we expect, applying pressure, right? And make sure that it's safe for intended use. But in come messy human beings, and they might be jumping into the chair and running around it. They might be exercising with the chair or using it for something completely different from what we thought they would, possibly even things we didn't intend that could be unsafe at times. So again, it's really good to know what's going on in their heads, what their mental model is, and how they're using it. We actually did some research, Vince and I. We said, who is our audience and what do they really want to learn so we can make sure that this discussion covers what they're interested in. So we did a quick survey and 11 of you responded. Thank you very much for that. That helped us a lot. So of those who responded, we saw that a lot of you had a leaning toward building web applications. Only 2 of the respondents work directly with designers and none with researchers. So that's an area that we want to make sure we connect for you since you might not have as much experience working with one. Also, you're already knowledgeable about Agile and general SDLC methodologies, so we were able to use that to scaffold on some of our concepts and terms. And you're especially curious about design concepts, so Vince is going to cover those, and information architecture, which I will spend more time on because we got some understanding of the user experience that you want when you leave here. So quickly for the planning stage of SDLC, when you're sky is the limit, you're thinking we can build this new thing, or there are hundreds of things we could do. You might have this huge backlog from product managers, from the CEO, from pet customers, support, sales, all saying you have to do these things. How do you really pick what's important and what's going to have an impact? One method is called an outcomes survey, and that's where you list each of the possible outcomes, like I will be able to create and later Vince will actually show you like writing a little user scenario. It's very similar. So then we ask them, how important is it that you be able to do this, and how satisfied are you with your current ability to do it? And that lets you plot this on 2 dimensions so that you can clearly find the ones that they're very important to them and they're not really happy with how it is now. And then you know the areas that will have the biggest impact on your users. Another example of when you really need research is once you've already picked the problem to solve. And a lot of times, being problem solvers, we say, aha, I know exactly what to do. And we run off to the first solution. It's a good solution and it can do it. But again, we need to then check to see, is this something that meets the expectations and the mental models of these people? So here's one example of what happened at Red Hat. We designed a tool that did work in testing. We wanted to migrate virtual machines over into Kubernetes, and it was easy to initiate the migration. The issue was that we had some parameters on characters. There were certain characters that were not allowed, and so we had to create something that would pop up a dialogue and tell the user which characters were not allowed, and then they could adjust the name and then continue. And we tested it and it worked. However, when we tested it with actual end users, they pointed out to us that this does work, but I'm never just migrating one VM or even 10. For larger orgs, I'm doing hundreds or even tens of thousands of VMs at a time, and I don't want to sit here and watch the process and wait for it to pop up hundreds of times. So we realized that we actually needed to create a utility. Just by quickly going to our users, we found this out, and it saved us a lot of money and time before it went to market. Another example at Red Hat, we were very excited when we created a cluster creation wizard so that now people who were on Amazon Web Services and Google Cloud platforms could create clusters right there instead of having to jump back and forth. And since that was a little complicated, they created documentation to help people do it, which is a great principle in usability. And then in QE testing, we saw it can be done in 3 to 8 minutes, which is a really reasonable task time for this. So we tested it out with people, and it was more like this. 3 out of 4 new users could not create a cluster without help. When they did, it took 30 to 48 minutes, almost 10 times the expected task time in some cases. We also found that the terminology on the screen was confusing them and kind of creating errors, so that's an information architecture concern, and they weren't even looking at the documentation. That sounds like a real failure, but actually because we did it before it went out the door, we were very quickly able to make adjustments. It's so easy to fix some labels and make documentation a little more noticeable, test it again, and bring down that task time to increase the user satisfaction. All right, so this is your chance to call out or type in the chat. The choice will probably be obvious, but if you want to share why, imagine that you came over to my house and we're going to make tea, and I say, can you go find me the cardamom? It's either in this nice white pantry or it's in this gray filing cabinet. Which one would you rather have to look in, and why? With no other information, I can't tell you anything else, just go look there or go look there. So hopefully, as you're thinking about this, it should be obvious, well, okay, the white pantry with the clear containers, I can kind of already see what's in there. So I'm not going to have to open a bunch of things and say, nope, nope, nope. So that's an easy one. For in software, you're probably familiar with the term feedback. The system should give good feedback. Like when you hit save, it should just do something like successfully saved, or if it's taking a minute, it should have a loading indicator so the user isn't thinking that it's just frozen. There's another concept related to my Dougie, information architecture, called feed forward, where the system can actually be so aligned with their mental model that it's almost transparent what's going to happen next. Oh my goodness, dog. Come here, dog. Yes. About 500 people around the world know that somebody's at my front door. So another thing, that's as a new user. Now as a returning user, you actually would still prefer the pantry, because this filing cabinet, even if you found the cardamom, now you're going to have to play the memory game to try to remember, where was it? Was it in column 4, row 3? There are no labels, so information architecture can make that better. Now there are 2 basic research approaches, and I'll actually give you a link later on how you could do these tasks beforehand when you're trying to figure out where to put stuff, maybe in something new, or when you already have a product and a layout. You can test it to see if it is intuitive for people to find, to do wayfinding in your product. So in the analysis stage, you could just do a card sort where you put the different things, like the different menu items or pages or tools that they could go to out in front of them and ask them, how would you group these things together? And it's pretty fun to watch humans do this. Maybe they'll put a cupcake with a muffin with the piece of cake and label it sweets. And then the hot dog with the turkey with the fish and label it proteins. Other people might put all things together and say, these have purple in it. These are mostly red. These are beige. But usually after a while, you can start to learn the way that people organize things, and then you can trust that they'll be able to figure out your site. Now with a tree jack, it's different. It's sort of like you already have the layout there, and now you want to make sure that they can find it. So you can actually do a card sort to figure out, then kind of put it together, and then do a tree jack to see if you did put it together in a way that makes sense. So here we have a grocery store. The groceries are already organized on the shelves, and I might ask people, okay, pretend that you're going to make a nice dinner tonight. Some kind of pasta with meatballs, a salad, and you want a good wine to go with it. And so then you could just observe, what aisles are they looking in? Are they going in any aisles that don't actually have any ingredients they need? Are they backtracking sometimes because they forgot something and getting frustrated? And that'll let you know maybe we need to reorganize things to meet their mental model and expectations. You don't have to know how to read this. It's a little grayed out. But this is just an example of a dendrogram that comes out of a digital card sort. So after I gave all these different things that we had to organize in a navigation to people and had them group them, 81% of them put these items in the product groups bucket. So I can have a pretty high confidence that 4 out of 5 people, if I put this on a web page like this, would already expect to find rel under product groups. Then this is an example of a tree jack. These are really fun to look at, but they contain a lot of great information. But essentially, you've followed them through wayfinding, and you can know how long it took them to find their way, what paths they took that were wrong, because then you might know that maybe the signage, the labels are misleading them a little bit, and how direct they were at finding their way. So these are, again, just a few things that you could do at each phase. You may have some different questions too that you want to learn about your users. There are different tools as well, but hopefully this at least lets you get started on understanding how research can support what you're doing.
All right, thanks, Amber. Now I'm going to talk about how design can support the software development process. You can go ahead. There we go. So like research, design starts in the planning stage long before the first line of code is even written. And during this stage, the primary UX design activity is to work with research to understand who we're designing for and to develop personas and journey maps for different user groups. And a persona is basically an archetype of a group of potential users. That is, a persona is a fictitious individual whose characteristics represent an entire category of users. So this is an example of a persona here. And excuse me, although her name isn't shown, this is Abigail, and she's Red Hat's archetype for an enterprise architect. And through research with real architects, we learned about their roles and responsibilities, their priorities and their passions, things like that, all the things that you see in here. And a persona takes what we learned through research and summarizes it in an easily consumable format. So on a single page, you get to know about Abigail, what she does, like I'm an engineer architect, what her responsibilities are, what her priorities are, what she's passionate about, all of those things that will help a designer to understand the person he's designing for. Some personas have a little bit different information, but most of them have the same basic type of things included. And they're about empathy, really. Again, empathy is really important in UX design. And I found this quote from Dana Meyer, who's a designer at Wix. And she says, by personifying users, It helps to visualize them as real people. As such, you can relate to their limitations, struggles, successes, and goals, ultimately enabling you to create a personalized user experience optimized for their needs. So by putting a face and a name to an otherwise abstract enterprise architect user group, personas can help product stakeholders reach consensus when disagreements arise about goals and priorities. If you don't agree about which feature or function is more important to get into the product, stakeholders can look to the persona to understand what's most important to Abigail and design for Abigail. And you can find dozens of different persona templates online, but they all look similar to this one. Sometimes personas get a bad reputation in UX and development because their content isn't always relevant to the design and are more like mini biographies than a tool that helps inform the user experience. And if they're not done well, they tend to include a lot of superfluous information about like the person's pets and their hobbies and their family dynamics. And that kind of information might be interesting, but it doesn't really help guide design. So knowing that, you know, Sam is he's a father of two and he's married and he likes to play tennis and likes to cook in his spare time. That's interesting information, but it doesn't really help guide design at all. And so once you understand the personas of the users you're designing for, the next step is to map each user's experience journey with your product or service. This is one part of the journey map for our enterprise architect, Abigail. The journey spans not just the interaction with the UI, but everything that precedes and follows that. In fact, here, the journey map doesn't even touch on the UI until the very last step where it says console. A customer journey map shows the different stages of users' interactions with a product or service, the tasks or actions the user completes at each stage, and the specific touch point. That touch point can be marketing materials, login pages, search functions, a customer support helpline, anything like that, any place where they interact even indirectly with your product or service. And then it also gives some indication of the complexity or difficulty of the interaction. This one doesn't actually show that, but oftentimes when you see a journey map, you'll see like a little line graph that goes up and down, and that up and down is indicating how difficult or complex users find that part of the journey. All of this information is research generated, either by talking to actual users or with internal surrogates familiar with the user's journey. And like personas, there are dozens of journey map templates that are freely available online, and they're a powerful tool when you're trying to do design during the planning stage. During the second stage of the life cycle, the analysis stage, as product requirements are being defined, UX should be intimately involved in that. In fact, some of the requirements can or should be specified from the standpoint of the end user. As I mentioned earlier, products and services exist to serve human beings, so it makes sense that when specifying what the product or service will do, it should be done from the standpoint of the humans who will be using it. So, as a best practice, it's always good to have UX-specific epics and stories in your feature backlog, and write them from the standpoint of a user. And they can take this form. As a blank, I want to be able to blank so that I can blank. And if you're familiar with Agile methodology, that is often the way user stories are formatted. So one example would be, suppose you're developing an app to help technology workers find co-working spaces in the city where they live. One of the product requirements might be to offer both map and satellite views of the city. So the requirement could just be listed as saying, offer satellite and map views. But it could also be written from the standpoint of the end user, where it would be, as a hybrid worker, I want to be able to easily switch between map and street views so that I can find parking close to the office where I'm going to be working. You can see how much richer that makes the requirement because it not only says the what, but it also says the who and the why. And so in this example, this is from Google Maps. It's just a screenshot. You can see in the lower left, they have a nice little button. It's actually a thumbnail of the satellite view. And you click on that, and it brings up the satellite view from the map view. And you can see from the arrows where the parking spaces are located very close to the office. This is the Red Hat Tower in Raleigh, North Carolina, where I work. All right, now we move on to the design stage. And this is when information architecture is explored and defined. And designers decide the layout of individual pages and the user flow between the pages. And this is typically done starting with wireframes and then iterating on the designs and increasing their fidelity as decisions are made based on research findings. So wireframes are nothing more than low fidelity representations of the UI layout and flow. I typically start with hand-drawn sketches. So once I get a requirement and I know what it is that needs to be done, I might make 3 or 4 different versions with different layouts for each page and run those by stakeholders. And in talking with the stakeholders, maybe we'll take elements from each of those 3 or 4 layouts and combine them into 1 or 2 different variations that then we'll run past a small group of users and get their feedback on them. And we'll do that iteratively. The great thing about wireframes is you can explore a lot of different ideas and options really quickly and then iterate on them because you're not putting a lot of details into the design. And so you can make changes and explore options very, very quickly. So here, this just shows how you can move during this phase from hand-drawn wireframes, real quick and dirty, to a lower fidelity digital prototype or mock-up. And here, this was created using a tool called Balsamic that's available for download on the web. And you can see, and once you get there, there's a little more detail. All right, also during the design phase, a designer should decide what components and patterns they're going to use for the project. Things like buttons, drop-downs, charts, wizards, all the pieces that make up the user interface. These components and patterns can be developed from scratch, but most often they come from a design system. And design systems are really important to understand because what they are is they're a collection of reusable components that are guided by standards, and they can be assembled together to build applications. UI components and patterns are like Lego pieces that you can fit together and when you're building out an application or an interface. And most designs, or all design systems, include a component or pattern library, code snippets, and as well as documented guidelines for how to use all of those components. They define not only what, but also how and why of the design. And together, they provide a visual design language for an organization to use across products. Most large organizations have their own design systems, and using a design system greatly simplifies and speeds up UI design and development, and it helps ensure consistency within and across applications. If an organization doesn't have their own design system, they should select one at this point. They can develop one on their own, but that is a really daunting task, and it can take years and a huge amount of resources to do that. Red Hat's design system Patternfly is constantly in development, and it's been in development for, the latest version has been in development for 4 years probably. Luckily, there are a number of open source design systems available to use for free. For example, IBM's Carbon design system and Google's Material Design are both open source. A little bit more about Patternfly. This is Red Hat's design system, and it's built on React and includes a component library, but also a color palette, typography, writing guidelines, and lots of other goodies like accessibility considerations. It's also open source, so all the code is freely available on GitHub, and anyone can use and or contribute to it. This slide shows how we use Patternfly design system to design and build the Patternfly website. So it's actually a self-documenting website, which is kind of cool. One interesting thing that some design systems address, including Patternfly, is writing guidelines. So this includes not only the terminology that should be used, so you have consistent terminology across your products and within your product, but also other guidelines for writing content, such as the tone or the voice you want to express in the UI. Do you want it to be friendly, formal, humorous? And this is often related to the brand. So if you look at the text at the bottom there, you can tell that Patternfly goes for a friendly tone in their UIs. Hello, we're Patternfly. We think blah, 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 blah. It's all written kind of in second person and very informal. Whereas if you're designing maybe a medical system, something that has a very serious domain that it works in, you probably don't want to be funny about that. You want it to be more serious and professional. So I'd encourage you all to look at Patternfly, check out the website, and get a better idea what design systems are all about. A final design task that's completed during the design phase of the development life cycle is developing a content strategy. And I'm in no way an expert on this. At Red Hat, we're lucky enough to have a dedicated content team who focuses on this aspect of UX design. But content strategy is essentially determining the best information to deliver when, where, and how users need it. So it encompasses both user assistance strategy and the content design and validation itself. And by user assistance, that includes embedded help text, video guides, product documentation, all that sort of stuff. The user assistance strategy involves deciding which of those best meet the user's needs at a given time. At Red Hat, we make extensive use of what are called quick starts. They're interactive tutorials that are built right into our UI, and they guide users through common tasks. The content design itself, which is putting the final words onto the page, including all of the microcopy, and that includes instructional text, page titles, field and button labels, error messages, as well as the product documentation. This is all done in parallel with the detailed UI design during the implementation and test phases. And just like UI flow and UI layout, content and end user assistance should be part of any usability testing that's done for the product during the design and implementation stages. In my experience, testing the content will often uncover terminology that's unfamiliar or confusing to users. Finally, during the implementation and testing phases of the development lifecycle, this is when the real UI design work is completed. In an agile environment, UX design stories are assigned to sprints just like development stories. Typically, design tries to work 1 to 2 sprints ahead of development so that designs can be completed and validated through testing before developers are ready to start implementation. So it's vital that user experience be included in sprint planning so that design and development can stay on this cadence of design, develop, design, develop. As far as completing the designs themselves, there are a number of digital design tools available to help you with this, but 2 of the most popular are called Sketch and Figma, and all of them have several features in common. They include component libraries, as well as reusable symbols. There are some that are built into the tools, but then you can also import your own external libraries. Like all of the components in Patternfly, with Patternfly terminology, branding, spacing, colors, all of that are part of a plugin that will plug into either Sketch or Figma. These prototyping tools allow you to string together individual pages so you can demonstrate workflows, and you can also add annotations and clickable hotspots to help you explain interaction behaviors and use them for interactive prototyping. Here I just show a high fidelity mockup that I created using components and symbols from the Patternfly sketch library. You can see the colors, typography, and spacing are all defined as part of the library. There are also annotations that along the right side that explain UI behaviors, like what should happen when I press this button, what page will I go to, and also like if there's a kebab menu or a drop down, what options will be in that menu. And so the goal of a high fidelity mockup like this or prototype is that a front-end developer should be able to take it and using the Patternfly code components that are part of the Patternfly ecosystem, they should be able to code it to look exactly like the mockup. That's the goal of high fidelity prototyping. And during that testing and implementation and testing phases, that's where you should be. You should have development be able to pick up your mockups or your designs and immediately implement them. So now Amber is going to talk about next steps.
Thank you, Vince. So we meant to be done 10 minutes earlier, so I'm going to rush through this part, but I did send this to Utsav so that he could share it with the links. For next steps for you, if you already have a product and you want to know how could I improve the user experience, 2 really quick, cheap things you could do tomorrow: a heuristic evaluation. So I've provided a link to something that could help you get started on the 10 heuristics or general rules, the 10 commandments of good UI and usability. So you could look at it yourself through that lens and probably come up with plenty of things that you could adjust there. Also, a really great way for you to establish empathy and start understanding your users, just watch them using your product. It can be really hard, but don't help them. Don't correct them. Just ask, can I see how you're using this? And can you narrate for me how you're feeling, where you get stuck, what you like or don't like, and take notes. If you wanted to get started on those information architecture tests like card sorts, Vince and I are not endorsing any one of these products, but some of them we found are really cheap, like Optimal Workshop. They give you 1 free study, and then the monthly plan there is very affordable. And if you're thinking about trying something new or trying a change, here are some starter kit on how to do your own paper or lo-fi prototype tests. Also some tips on how to find participants for your studies. I forgot to mention that feel free to reach out to local universities, because people who want to be UX designers and researchers often need something on their portfolio, some real product work. They'd probably be happy to jump on some of your projects. And then Vince put together a list of respected foundations and organizations that have put together really good training materials. Some of them are free. Some you could choose to pay for a full training, even master level certification in some of these areas, including personas, design systems, then also links to prototyping tools. And some of the articles and things that we referenced in here were from Nielsen Norman Group. They're gold standard. Everything they do is based on evidence and their own research. So before we open it up for questions, here are our links so that you could stay in touch with us. I do want to point out that there was a slight ulterior motive. I, being a manager in research operations, I have about 15 researchers who like to talk to people who make things, make software, make apps. We talk to developers, architects, and we're not trying to sell anything. Rather, we're trying to understand your experience. And so we can actually compensate you pretty well for your time, usually in studies. And then you could see what it's like to participate in UX research and the kinds of things that we're trying to learn. So there's a nice link here to sign up to participate in our research in the future. What's up? We're done with a few minutes left for questions.
Hey, yeah, thank you, Amber. And yeah, we are open to questions. Sapan has raised his hand. Yes, Sapan?
Nice to meet you, Sapan.
Same here, Amber. Thanks a lot. I knew it's going to be an amazing presentation. Thanks a lot. We learned a lot. I kind of appreciated more that this was so much targeted towards developers and the audience that is on the call. Really loved it. But there was something that Vince said got my attention. I think you implied that in one iteration, UX designers and developers could work together. Is that right, Vince? And this sometimes.
Yeah, the idea is that if you're talking about like an agile development process, the idea is you want your designers, planning should be done up front. So when you do your sprint planning, you know which features or which backlog items you're going to be working on maybe 2 or 3 sprints ahead. And so designers Ideally, we'll be able to do the design for those user stories, say in sprint 1, knowing that development won't start until sprint 2 or 3. And so what we try to do is, design 1 or 2 sprints ahead so that there's time not only for the design, but also to do some review and some validation of those designs so that they're locked in, they're very tight, and they're ready to be developed when the sprint schedule says it's development time for that user story.
And I'll add that for research, we like to be several sprints ahead and know what the designers are going to need to know to make those decisions. And also when you're going to have a prototype ready for us to test, we can be lining up participants while you're still building it. So that can really help us shave time in the Agile process.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, one of the only reasons that I asked this question was that this is how usually it works in almost in every company where the UX work happens like 1 or 2 iterations ahead. But in this scenario, like developers are almost left behind. So when the work comes to them, it's almost predefined. It's already it's concrete, and they are not part of the process of. So what ends up happening is sometimes a person wants something, a designer wants something, but it's not easy or it's not even possible to be done in a way, from technical perspective. And that's something that I've been wondering, that how that distance between a developer and the UX or UI work that happens. Is there a way they could work a little bit closer than, let's say, 2 sprints?
What we do is we have weekly sync calls with our developers. And so while we're developing, we invite developers we review our designs with the developers as we're going on. So every week we'll meet with them, and as the design is evolving, the developers can give feedback. And it, like you said, it happens all the time. We'll design something, they're like, nah, that's going to be way too hard to do, or we don't have that information from the API. And so we'll go back and we'll iterate on our design based on what we learned from the developers. So yeah, we work hand in hand every week with our developers.
And you hear that, you hear people say, we don't have a place at the table, we're always invited late. And researchers and designers are complaining of that too. So I think there's no table. I think we have to create these discussions together. And researchers love, they should, if they care about the user, love to bring developers along. Because if you can see firsthand in the sessions and you have the most technical questions, you're the expert on the product. So you should be involved in crafting the questions that we're trying to answer. Full disclosure, Safwan and I have worked together for 15 years, right? An NLP.
Yes, we have.
And all sorts of fun things, yeah. Do we have other questions itself from the audience?
Yes, so we have one question in the chat. Nitin is asking how to create a unified persona from diverse personas.
You want to take that, Amber, or you want me to give it a shot?
I'll give my opinion. You may have a different one. I actually am trying to do the opposite, Nitin, because we're doing personas of developers, for example. Is there one flavor of developer in the world? Is there one type? Or when I say developer, does that put a mental model in your head of kind of yourself and your pals? So we're trying to actually break it down more so that we can understand the range of people, the size of organization, the type of apps they're working on, the challenges, the environment that they work in. A developer who works from home may have very different concerns and needs than someone who's right there connected to the infrastructure and so on. So I'm sorry to not tell you how to do that, but I'd argue that it's the opposite. Instead of trying to design for one monolithic creature that doesn't exist, try to understand the ranges of people, maybe 2 or 3.
Yeah, that's definitely true, especially for developers. We're learning that, there are developers who write end code. There are developers who are more platform engineers. So developer is a really overloaded term. But yeah, as far as creating a unified persona, it's really more of an art, I think, than a science. It's researchers like Amber, they try and get a broad spectrum of end users and just pick and choose the characteristics that are most consistent. And that's what goes into a persona. It's not, you're never going to capture every nuance of every end user you talk to. But you're looking for that consistency. And it's sort of the 80-20 rule. If you can design something that accommodates 80% of your users, you're doing pretty well and matches that persona as far as their wants and needs and pain points. Would you say 30 people before you really make big bets on a persona?
Yeah. There's no magic number, but yeah, if you talk to 10 people, then you can say, oh, 8 said this, so 80% of people, the more you talk to, the more you can trust. Thank you for that, Nitin. Any other questions? I could stay on a few more minutes too. If anybody is shy and thinks we have to rush, I could stay if you have a question.
So Teresa has a question.
I have just one question regarding the simplicity of design and like ease of navigation. So I'll just take the example that we had of those two cabinets, right? One was the pantry, which was easier to navigate, and one was just filing cabinet, which didn't want to. So suppose the website, if you have this something like the pantry, right, which will be faster for the user to go ahead. However, if we do this, it will be also like the user will be staying on the site for very less amount of time. What if we want to increase the amount of time they want to be, like the engagement, something like that? For example, if we take a real life example of say IKEA, they have it kind of a maze and the customer just stays inside for a long time. Is there a way to replicate that for a website design wise?
Yes. So, and they do that with their physical stores too. It's almost impossible to get out, isn't it?
Yeah. Exactly.
So if that is your goal, so what you need to do is talk to the users and make sure that they're comfortable with that they're not frustrated by that experience. Because sometimes we're trying to force something that we want them to do that they do not want, right? And as long as there's like a way for them, I just know exactly what I need. I need a replacement leg for my table. Please don't make me go through 100 rows. As long as there's a way for them to do what they seek to do, you can certainly create that kind of browsing, comfortable experience. I couldn't tell you the exact way to do it, but yeah, more of the mystique and the labeling and the wandering has definitely been accomplished in sites. Vince, do you have any specifics? Go ahead. Yeah.
Amber, I just wanted to add something to what you just said. I have seen that in some newspapers as well as sites like LinkedIn, they literally suppress, their algorithm suppresses if you have external links in there. So if you put an external link in LinkedIn that let's say goes to Google News or something, that post literally gets suppressed. Not a lot of people actually see it so that you don't go out of LinkedIn. And newspapers specifically takes care that they take care that the external links are not in their articles. So they keep like internal links, but rarely external links.
That's a good point. So I would say if you know that's the first of all, I would go back up and verify that the people that you want to come to your site will want that type of experience, that they won't be upset by it, right? And test that concept out with them, which if it's similar to the IKEA wandering experience, and then set some measurable objectives and actually watch them using the site, ask them to browse and see if it has the desired impact and measure how they feel about it. But Vince, you had something.
The question was around if one of your metrics is time spent on site, so you want to keep people on a site. Yeah, there's also things you can do with built into the UI, like little distractions. And this works also if you have tasks that are taking a long time to complete in the background. I mean, you've all seen probably, they'll put little cute animations into a UI that distract the user so they're not really paying attention to how long something is taking when they're using the site. So that's another thing you can do if your end goal really is just to keep people on a page or on a site for a certain amount of time or as long as possible. Incidentally, that's the way elevators are designed too, the ones that show you how the floors. So you can watching the progress of the elevator is helpful. Another thing, that's also why they also put mirrors next to elevators oftentimes, because it gives the users, people who are waiting, and it's true, it distracts them because they're looking in the mirror, checking themselves out. They're not paying attention to how long it's taking the car to get down to the floor.
So Priyadarshini has the question, can we get all our desired required elements and components from the design system?
Usually, well, it depends. I mean, the answer is always it depends. Usually not. That's why I was saying, like with Patternfly, it's an evolving design system. So Patternfly today is very much different than it was when it first was released. As designers find elements and components that they need that aren't satisfied in Patternfly, the model that we use is you build it into a product, you go to the Patternfly governance board, and you say, hey, this is something we need in our product. We're going to build it regardless. Is this something that we could contribute to Patternfly? And so if the board says, hey, yeah, and they'll actually survey other designers, at least within Red Hat, they'll say, is this something that would be useful for other teams? And if enough people say, yeah, we could use something like that, then as it's developed by a specific product team, but made general enough that it can be contributed upstream to Patternfly and become part of the Patternfly component library later.
And when you spot things that you need that aren't already in there, the design system should have color swatches, fonts. It should have some standards that you can start from so that whatever little new widget you make, it does look like it belongs there and is consistent.
Yeah. Like, for example, we needed a click and drag widget in one of our UIs, and it didn't exist in Patternfly. And so the developer I was working with and we designed and developed that and then contributed upstream. Same thing with a file upload component. There what didn't used to be one in Patternfly. Now there is because we contributed it.
I think of it a lot like Lego blocks. Like most of the time the rectangles work, but when you really want like a windshield for the cool jet that you've built, maybe you have to build it, but then Lego might manufacture those because they're so great, right? Thanks for all these great questions.
Yeah, thank you, Priyadarshini. We'll take like one last question if that's any. Okay, so Nitin is asking, can we learn a new shared mental model?
I would need clarification on that. Is the question,
Nitin?
is it, yeah. Nitin, are you asking, is it possible to learn a new mental model or?
Yes, just like as Vince mentioned, we use hyperlinks to navigate to other pages, and then there is a logo on the left. This is a shared mental model. Can we learn anytime soon a new shared mental model? Is it possible?
Yeah, I think so for sure. It's like
Every time I download my iPhone, the latest Apple, it forces me to figure something out that they're like, you need to do it this way, right?
Yeah, and I was thinking of like Netflix or streaming services. Those, 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, those didn't exist. So there really wasn't a mental model for how an interaction with a streaming service was going to work. But now when you go to a streaming service, whether it be Hulu or Netflix or Amazon Prime, they all kind of look the same because people have, you have expectations that, you're going to have your most popular titles or the ones that are recommended for you are going to be along the top. And then you're going to have, categories sorted by, drama or comedy or whatever down below. And so people now kind of have a mental model of what a streaming service UI is going to look like. And that's just been learned over the last 10 years through experience and people copying each other's designs.
And I'll add two different little things to it. So I typed in the chat skeuomorphics. So when you're translating something like, remember when we took physical books and it was the first time e-readers were coming out, they had this flipping motion because that was the mental model that people had of turning a page. Now they offer continuous scrolling as well because people get it now, right? But even the little bookmarks look like a little physical bookmark because that's what they remember. So sometimes scaffolding what's new onto an existing mental model helps with that adjustment. And then the second thing is just a weird example that might help is remember the first time you went to a restaurant that was like, do you have Subway? Probably, where they assemble your sandwich for you and you say, I want the veggie patty, I want the cheese, I want the, and that was new, but they had good, you're used to sit down, order food is brought to you. So they needed good signage, they needed it laid out, maybe they needed to help you, but now other restaurants are starting to use that as well. So if you're the first time person, you may need a lot more guidance and nudging to make sure the person can find their way. But yes, you can do it. It's just got to be worth the person's time and effort.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was a deep question. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is all the questions that we have for now. So we can wrap up, right? So lastly,
Yep.
again, thank you very much, Amber and Vince, for doing this with us, for giving a talk with our community. It was a wonderful talk, and I'm sure everyone gained something from this talk. And also thank you to all the attendees for joining us and asking such wonderful questions. And this talk will also be available on YouTube in next few days so that you can also look back at it and share it with your friends. And yeah, also just one last thing to mention. So we have Richard Weil coming up for our next talk. It will be a workshop on outside and BTD. So look forward to it and stay tuned to our social media and our updates. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Shukriya.